What is up? What is up, YouTube? I got one more position. I'm doing a side view. The camera is coming from the side. I know I said I wasn't going to this Karmelo Anthony stabbing incident. I said I wasn't going to do any more of these. Let the brother, everybody opinion, let y'all just do, the judge and the courts are going to handle this. But I ran across this last video with these analyzing the Karmelo Anthony stabbing incident. Attorneys. These are attorneys. Attorney Mark J. Victor and Andy McKendall. Uncle Mike can't read, y'all. Hey, attorneys on retainer. Attorneys on retainer. Now, I thought this was interesting, man, because I want people to check this out with an open mind, especially for people that really think that self-defense stuff, self-defense is like, Your Honor, I had no other choice. I tried everything else. I actually pleaded with the man. I ran. I'm out of breath. I can't run no more. I fought the man. The man was on top of me in the Trayvon Martin. Rest in peace to Trayvon Martin in this situation. But self-defense is, I had to take this weapon and kill this dude because he was on top of me. He was beating me to death. I was blacking out. I didn't know what else to do. Nobody was there to help me. Self-defense, man, need to be taught in school, especially in high school. It needs to be, man, because you all got it twisted. And then when you go to court, I ain't realize you can't just take a knife. Hey, you know what? I'm gonna let them break it all the way down, man. Y'all hit that subscribe button, hit that bell, and let's stop a little bit and everything and talk. Here we go, man. Here we go.
A stabbing in Frisco, Texas divides the nation. Was this unjustifiable homicide or valid self-defense? We've got the full case breakdown coming for you. Stay tuned. This is attorney Andy Marcantel and attorney Mark J. Victor from the Attorneys for Freedom Law Firm here today to talk about a very hot button case. How you doing today, Mark?
I am absolutely fantastic, like every day. And this is going to be an interesting one to talk about.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this one. People know that our law firm handles exclusively self-defense cases. And so whenever there's a high-profile self-defense case, we're always on the lookout for it, and we love analyzing this stuff.
Yeah, it makes me really happy to say that. I mean, we are the only law firm in the nation, probably in the world, that does nothing but self-defense cases. So this is right in our backyard. Happy to talk about it.
I think we're also particularly well positioned to analyze this case, Mark, because as I mentioned in the little plug that I just did at the beginning, this case really has divided people and really about irrelevant things to the self-defense analysis. It seems to be, for example, politically divided right down the middle in terms of right of center and left of center. None of that stuff is relevant in our analysis.
Yeah, I think people who have been following us for some time know that we don't care about that stuff. We analyze it exactly the same. We don't care what color anybody is. Of course, if we were trying the case, it's something we got to consider because the population cares about such things. But the law is the law, and the law applies exactly the same way, regardless of what color someone's skin is or what sex they are. And that's how we analyze it. We refer to it as calling balls and strikes.
That's right. And people who have been watching our podcast for a while know that we are immune to blind allegiance to political parties. We oftentimes call this kind of dismissively, the R's and the D's are both up to different infringements of your freedom. We're pro-freedom. And so don't worry about political ideation creeping its way into this forthcoming, very objective legal analysis.
Yeah, same with police officers. We analyze those videos as well, and sometimes the police get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. We're not on either side. I like to say we're very pro good cop and very anti bad cop. So getting that all out of the way, I think we should just analyze it in a strict legal sense.
Yes, and before we dive into the facts of the case, another
Wow.
really important thing that is not very fashionable these days, but we'll throw it out there, which is that people should wait to jump to judgment. We don't have all of the information yet. Keep in mind at this point, we got some witness statements. There's been a police report that's been released. There's no video of the incident. Not all the statements have been made public. And for all we know, there's some other evidence kicking out there. So our analysis today will be based on the available evidence, but people should always refrain to jump to judgment until it's all out there.
Yeah, and even when you make a conclusion, you should still remain open-minded for more evidence. I mean, it's a little bit of an aside, but people sometimes will ask me in a social context, hey, Mark, what do you think about this issue or that issue? And sometimes my reply is, I don't know enough about that. I don't have enough data. Like, they can't believe that I don't have an opinion on every single issue. But we should say that more today, right? It's important to recognize that you need to get to a certain threshold of information. I mean, fortunately, in a legal matter like this, we already start with a presumption, right? This person, Mr. Karmelo Anthony, he's presumed innocent. So let's already start with some controversy. Maybe the release conditions here. Do you want to start there?
Sure, yeah. The bond in this case was set to $1 million, which is not an unusual starting place for the charges, which are murder. And just recently, a couple of days before the filming of this episode, the judge in the case reduced that bond down to $250,000, $250,000, which the family swiftly posted. And now Mr. Anthony is out of custody, and people are outraged about this.
Yeah, people who have already concluded that Mr. Anthony has done something wrong and actually has committed a crime. They're upset that the bond was lowered and that he was out of custody. Sorry, folks, we have a presumption of innocence in our country, and the purpose of bond is not to punish. And so I find it entirely appropriate at this point, and maybe 250 is a little high, given, I mean, look, the question here is Karmelo Anthony a flight risk? There's some argument that he is, right? I mean, he was caught fleeing from the scene. So there's some argument he is. On the other hand, he's 17 years old. He probably doesn't have a passport. He probably has no money. He's probably not going to get very far. And there are ways, which the judge has already invoked, right? Electronic monitoring, check in every week. There needs to be an adult there. There are ways to deal with that flight risk. And then danger to the community. While Mr. Anthony is accused of this crime, and apparently there was another event out there in the world where he was involved in some kind of a fight. Maybe
I think it was at the school.
Yeah, he was involved in some kind of a fight. He wasn't convicted of anything. That's not enough of a sort of criminal history, I think, for a judge to conclude this guy's a danger to the community such that $250,000 a bond is insufficient. So I don't have any bone to pick with that bond amount. In fact, I think you could even make an argument it's too high, given the presumption of innocence in strictly looking at the two things that matter, flight risk and danger to the community.
Yeah, to the people who are upset about this, they're upset until they find themselves in a similar situation. You and I represent people from all across the political spectrum, and we represent many gun owners, and many gun owners are right of center. And we've had tons of cases where our client acted in self-defense, and it even turned out in the end to be an acquittal or a dismissal and valid court-recognized self-defense. And the prosecutor was trying to hold them on $1 million bonds or $500,000 bonds or $250,000 bonds or more while they were presumed innocent. So either we're serious as a country about this presumption of innocence thing or we're not. So we think people should be more consistent with this.
All right, we've already pissed some people off, so
good.
Yeah, we've gotten started off on the right foot. All right.
There was only, before we move on to the facts, there was only one part of your description of the characteristics of Mr. Anthony that I disagree with, and it's because of a recent phenomenon. You mentioned he's young, he's got no priors, this, that, and the next thing, and he has no money. Well, as of recently, that's actually not the case,
Yeah,
Mark.
that's a
And
good point.
that's another thing that's getting people excited about the case is that a massive defense fund has started for this guy, over $400,000 by my last count of it. All right, let's dive into the facts here. And once again, disclaimer, this is only based upon the witness statements and the police reports that we have so far. There's been a very limited amount of discovery that's been issued to the public. A number of these witnesses have spoken to news channels, including the deceased's, and that's Mr. Metcalf, Austin Metcalf, his brother.
Twin brother, yeah.
His twin brother, whose arms he died in after the stabbing. So that's what we're working off of, so let's go with the facts.
Yeah, I mean, anything can emerge. There could be a video of this event. That video could show the victim here actually being far more aggressive. There could be other facts that come out. So if that happens, then we will revise our analysis accordingly, as should all reasonable people.
I agree. You know, I was having a conversation with somebody just kind of conversationally about this case yesterday, and they were asking me, well, what do you think? And I gave them essentially a short version of the legal analysis we're about to do. But I made sure to put the proviso in there. If a video comes out, for example, or some piece of evidence that we're not aware of right now comes out, I reserve the right to modify my opinion, and this opinion is based on the information that I have right now. I got to be honest. I'd actually be surprised if it turns out there was no video of this whatsoever, given that it took place right there in the bleachers of an athletic field, and it sounds like maybe a little playing field or something like that, but it's a school, and so you would expect them to have surveillance cameras and things like that.
We'll see.
All right. So the facts, as recounted by the witnesses in the police report, are something as follows. It is a track meet, and Mr. Metcalf and Mr. Anthony are on opposing schools, opposing teams. It's not clear to me whether they were actually competing. I don't think they were competing that day. I think they were both there in support to kind of view the event. Now, the weather was bad that day. It was raining that day, and so the schools had set up little tents, and some of the tents were kind of set up to the side of the bleachers, and some of the tents were set up actually directly over the seats, the bleacher seats, and I think that's the location we're dealing with here. And so Mr. Anthony, I think maybe to get out of the rain, you know, it's pretty sympathetic, you know, to try to get out of the rain, went under this tent. That was not his tent. It wasn't his school's tent. And Mr. Metcalf, whose tent it was, who belonged to the proper school for that tent, went up to him and said, "Hey, man, this isn't your tent. You got to leave," and instructs him to leave. At that point, there's some tension in the air, and according to reports, Mr. Anthony says, "Touch me and see what happens. Touch me and see what happens." At that point, it sounds like Mr. Metcalf obliges him and touches him. Now, how he touches him, there's a couple of different witness statements that vary here. For example, one witness says that he put his hand on his shoulder. Another witness says he shoves him at that point, but he touches him, which we might call ordinary physical force, and we'll talk about that concept.
And I think, by the way, the twin brother, says he didn't touch him at all. What he touched was his bag. He picked up his bag and tried to move his bag or something and said, you're leaving or something. But we could analyze all three of those possibilities.
Yeah, all differing witness statements, but we'll analyze each of those in turn. At any rate, after touching someone...
I think that's a good point right there. Let's go with all three scenarios. In other words, we're going to draw our conclusion using A, B, and C. A, the man touched him, or B, he hit him, or C, he didn't do either one. He just grabbed his belongings. I'm just going to grab his belongings and try to move his belongings. All three of these situations does not call for self-defense as a stabbing or using deadly force as self-defense. Is the point. Deadly force. What kind of force you use to defend yourself?
But we could analyze all three of those possibilities.
Yeah, all differing witness statements, but we'll analyze each of those in turn. At any rate, after touching someone or something, Mr. Anthony reaches into his backpack, pulls out a black knife, and stabs Mr. Metcalf in the heart. one stab motion, and then at that point runs away with knife in hand, but then quickly ditches the knife basically there in the bleachers, ditches his bag there in the bleachers, and leaves the scene. And in the meantime, Mr. Metcalf tragically dies right there in his brother's arms, in his twin brother's arms, which is absolutely heartbreaking, obviously. And so at that point, Mr. Anthony runs and makes it to a fence line where a school resource officer, has been alerted of what's going on. It sounds like they were called. They came out. They saw him kind of on this fence line and yell out to him. And he turns around and he says, "I was protecting myself." And so at that point, he was taken into custody and detained. It sounds like the school resource officer was communicating with another officer on his radio and said something to the extent of, "I have the alleged suspect here with me." And then a spontaneous statement was made by Mr. Anthony, something to the extent of, "Not alleged suspect, I did it." And so at that point, the resource officer is kind of walking Mr. Anthony back over to where the action is. And during that walk, or maybe when they arrived there, there's a statement made by Mr. Anthony to the police officer. And it's in the form of a question, actually. It's, "Can what I did be considered self-defense?" And so the resource officer basically responded, "Look, man, I don't even know what happened at this point." And so those are all the statements that we are aware of right now. And those are all the witness statements.
Apparently, Mr. Anthony has not watched any of our videos, and he hasn't heard us say any of the millions of times that we've said, "Just shut up." And he decides to make all these statements. As you mentioned, "I was protecting myself." He put his hands on me, I think, is another statement.
See, people think that they can have court with the police. The police is not the court. How can I put this? Explaining your situation to a police officer is not going to get you off of anything that went down. Asking the police officer, this self-defense, right? It's 1,000 ways things can be spent. Their job is to make sure that they don't even tell you anything. Where the police officer said this, "Nope. Look, dog, I don't know what went down, man. I just got here. I'm trying to get all this stuff together myself. But I'm not going to answer you and say, 'Oh, yeah, you got that self-defense, what you did.' Or, 'No, that's not self-defense.' I'm not going. The police is not there to help you. The police is only there to break up stuff, diffuse things, take a person to jail. That's it. I take you to jail, let the judge figure this thing out. If a police officer sends you to jail saying you're under arrest, you gotta go. You gotta go. You can't if a police officer says you gotta go, you gotta go. That's their job. Their job is to determine if you gotta go in there. That's their job. You cannot sit there and say, "Wow, I ain't do nothing. F you, police." No, the police got the hardest job in the world, man. Because if they say you gotta go to jail and you don't go, now you you resisting. So you're telling me you're gonna resist me? Yes, right. I'm gonna resist you. That's another charge. You can't resist. Why you think that's on the books? That should tell you right there. If the police say you have to go to jail, if they right or wrong, that's not for you to decide. Not right then and there. And that's where the problem lies. If the police say you have to go to jail, you must go.
Shut up. And he decides to make all these statements. As you mentioned, "I was protecting myself." He put his hands on me, I think, is another statement. He says, "I'm not alleged. I did it." He put his hands on me. I told him not to. Is he going to be okay? Could it be considered self-defense? Well, he just took away a whole bunch of different possibilities of defenses right there. He admitted he was the person. He said he put his hands on me. That's what he said. He didn't say there was a whole group of them coming towards me. He didn't say, I thought he was reaching for something, a gun, a knife, a bat, something like that. He didn't say, I was really worried because I was on the bleachers and I could fall and get hurt or get thrown off or something like that. Once you start talking, yes, what you say matters, but also what you didn't say matters, right? Because if you start adding facts later on, a year and a half, 2 years down the line, after your lawyers have been talking to you, after maybe that video comes out, witnesses come out, you start figuring out, maybe I got a problem here. Oh, yeah, by the way, this happened, that happened. You are going to give that prosecutor so much happiness and joy when you start throwing facts, when you're on the stand talking about what happened, saying, oh, yeah, there were other things that were really important here. And you can see that prosecutor sitting there licking their proverbial chops, just getting ready to get up there and rip this guy a new one. Folks, this is why you just shut up. How many times do we have to say it? Just shut up. I know other people give different advice. Don't listen to them.
No.
Don't listen to them. Again, the best advice is if you got a lawyer who you can call right away, like every AOR client can, you call your attorney and then let us tell you what, if anything, to say. But when you start saying things, you just laid out your defense. You limited your criminal defense lawyer later on down the road. This guy, Karmelo Anthony, didn't listen to any of that. Obviously, he's 17. He's not thinking. He's just making statements, and all of that is going to hurt him.
Yeah, and you're always closing more doors than you're opening, right? It's crazy. Some organizations and even some lawyers, even some criminal defense lawyers that I've heard tell people to say, oh yeah, after a self-defense incident, the only statement you make to the cops is, I was in fear for my life. Well, think about this. You're closing so many other defenses to your future lawyer. For example, there are times you can use deadly physical force to protect a third party. Yep. There are certain states, Texas is one of them, that have what we might call a general crime prevention statute that allows you to use deadly physical force to stop the commission of a very serious crime. There are a number of reasons why you may be able to exercise deadly physical force that have nothing to do with being in fear for your life. And you and I have been saying for years on this podcast, Mark, in our opinion, the Miranda warnings, the popular Miranda warnings that the police read to people, should really be modified a little bit in order to be more accurate. Currently, they say anything you say or do can and will be used against you. Really, it should be anything you say or do, and the things that you don't say can be used against you, and they will be used against you, because in the hypothetical you just pointed out, if in trial for the first time, for example, evidence is presented where he says, yeah, I thought that this Metcalf guy was going for a weapon or something like that. The prosecutor now gets to stand up and say, isn't it true you talked to the cops that day? You didn't say anything about seeing a knife, did you? You're making it up for the stand right now for this trial, aren't you, after talking to your attorneys? And they can do that because he didn't just shut up.
Yeah, and there are other problems as well, just while we're on the point. I mean, as I recall reading the police report, the person that those statements were allegedly made to didn't have his body camera on. Well, I hope they're right. He could have put anything in there. He could have, maybe Mr. Anthony winds up saying, yeah, I did make some statements, but that wasn't exactly what I said. I did tell him about I was in fear. Maybe, who knows? He could have said other things. But when you start talking, that officer is going to write down what it is you said. Do you really want to risk 10, 20, maybe more years of your life? And here you're probably talking about more years of your life for a 17-year-old kid on the accuracy of what that police officer, who may not have his body camera on, is going to write down in his report. You just put your life in that police officer's hand. So even if you did say exactly the best possible thing, ain't no guarantee that that officer is going to put it down in that police report accurately. Again, just shut up as a general piece of advice. I mean, I've only been doing this 31 years now. I've only been doing these kinds of cases for 31 years. Maybe I'm totally wrong about this, but you and I have seen more cases than we can possibly remember when, together we've been sitting there saying, man, if this guy had just shut up.
Yeah.
Or the worst.
Because they experts. Here's the thing that tripped me out. Now, we have I saw one video with a lawyer. This guy's a lawyer. black lawyer, and you can tell. I wish everybody had this instinct of you can tell uh, the educational level of somebody. This guy claiming to be a lawyer. He's on YouTube, got a YouTube channel and everything. I don't know his name, I don't even care. But he was making a statement saying that the police officer should have read him his Miranda rights when he was detaining the little boy, Karmelo Anthony. And I'm like, what? What you mean? He should have, when he was detaining him, he told him to put his hands up, walk toward me. At that moment, he was being detained. He should have read him his rights. What? Who gets their rights read when they being detained? Half of the people don't even get their rights read when they getting locked up. When the police officers say you're under arrest. And these are the things that we don't know. Learn the law. Can you just freaking try to learn it? Look it up. Ask ChatGPT or something. No police officer read somebody their rights for being detained. I'm gonna detain you. You're sitting in the police car. He should have read him his Miranda rights. What kind of laws you practicing, man? Oh my God, we just want to flip this thing so right to be right that you're saying stupid things out of your mouth, man.
First piece of evidence in the case came out of his own mouth. How many times have we said that? So
all you gotta do is keep your mouth shut and let your lawyer do the job. He didn't. He should have read him his Miranda right. Okay, he didn't. So what? That's your opinion, lawyer. You wasn't there. You can't make up. You're making up the story. Don't try to make it up your way. They should have did this or they should have did this. The police should have did this. That ain't the story. The lawyer goes by the facts. Tell me what happened and how much talking did you do? How much mess I got to get you out of first?
The cases for 31 years. Maybe I'm totally wrong about this, but you and I have seen more cases than we can possibly remember. When, together we've been sitting there saying, man, if this guy had just shut up. Yeah. Or the worst piece of evidence in the case came out of his own mouth. How many times have we said that? So we keep saying it. I think probably 99% of criminal defense lawyers agree with us. There's one or two around the edges that try to make some more specific advice. And then there are other non-criminal defense lawyers, right? Police officers, use of force experts, different commentators who don't do these kinds of cases, who like to offer different kinds of advice.
Even huge associations like the NRA is telling its members, just tell the cops you were in fear for your life. As you mentioned, he's 17 years old. Parents should learn from this. Parents across the country should learn from this. Sit down with your kids. Explain to them what an interaction with the police looks like and tell them not to talk to the police, especially if they're minors. There's special rules in all jurisdictions in the United States that extra precautions need to be taken when cops are dealing with minors. They should ask to talk to you, and they don't want to make any statements until they speak to a lawyer. So sit down with your kids and have this conversation before they're in this situation.
And by the
one word should be coming out of your mouth. I don't care. Don't say I don't care. The first thing we try to do is get our butts out of hot water. And that's not what the police is there for. Man, I was just this guy is lying to me saying he was just doing this when I got him on tape. Got him on video doing something else, but he telling the police officer, you're already wrong. No matter what you say, first of all, anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. Period. Can we just learn that? Stop right there. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. You ain't even done nothing wrong. You ain't even think about doing nothing wrong. Hell, you still in your house looking at YouTube. But learn this one thing right now. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. So if you say it to the police, anything, one word should be coming out your mouth, period, when you're involved with the police. Lawyer. What's your name, sir? Lawyer. Where you coming from? Lawyer. Lawyer. One word should be coming out your mouth. Lawyer. You're not going to answer my questions? Lawyer. One word. I don't care what. Do you know your ABCs? Lawyer. What's today's date? Lawyer. One word should be coming out your mouth, period.
By the way, this is what police officers tell their kids as well. They tell their own kids to just shut up. This is what police officers tell other police officers after shootings. Just shut up, at least until you have to deal with that internal affairs interview. And so, look, good police officers recognize and respect an invocation of the right to remain silent. And while we're on the topic, it's always good to say, I want my lawyer present as well, because, you know, if you don't mention the magic word lawyer or attorney, generally speaking, the police officers can continue to ask you questions. But if you mention the magic word in an unequivocal kind of a way, I want my lawyer, not farting around with, you know, do I need a lawyer? I think I might need a lawyer. No, you got to say, I want my lawyer before I answer any questions. Then the rules are they don't get to ask any more questions. And if they do, and even if you do answer, you've now given a good argument to your defense attorney to suppress that statement,
That's
at
right.
least in the case in chief. Best case, again, just shut up.
Yes, and notably with this particular case, he wasn't arrested at that point, so he wasn't in custody. He wasn't being interrogated in custody. That's when the Miranda warnings are triggered. That's when your Fifth Amendment rights kind of turn on at that point. So because he wasn't arrested and undergoing a custodial interrogation, and because he was kind of vomiting out these statements sporadically, all that stuff is going to come into evidence.
It's all coming in. It's all going to hurt him.
Yep. All right. Let's talk about a couple really important general principles of self-defense that people need to understand, right? Because I keep seeing people talk about, well, you know, Metcalf touched Anthony first. Don't you have a right to defend yourself in this country? Doesn't every Texan have a right to defend themselves? We should really differentiate ordinary physical force and deadly physical force and talk about the requirements to use either.
Yeah, and you know, if people are interested here, they should look at the Texas Penal Code, Section 9.31. That's the section that talks about what we refer to as ordinary self-defense. And then the next section, 9.32, that's the section that talks about deadly force. Think of it as two different boxes here, right? There's the ordinary physical force, and then there's the deadly physical force. This is what we talk about when we use the word proportionality, right? Of course you have a right to defend yourself. We consider ourselves self-defense absolutists. We take the position that everybody at all times has a right to defend yourself. No problem against anybody who is aggressing against you.
Facts.
But that doesn't mean you get to use disproportionate force. So even if we imagine a situation where Mr. Metcalf is being the aggressor, and it's certainly not clear from the record that we have that Metcalf is aggressing, but if you sort of steelman Mr. Anthony's position here, give him the benefit of all doubts, right? He made these statements, he put his hands on me. Let's imagine Mr. Anthony, let's ascribe the best case scenario to him. It was raining. He wanted to get out of the rain. This was the closest tent. He just went in there, sort of scooted himself in there, sat down quietly in the corner. Forget about the fact that he brought this knife with him. He just had good intentions about everything from the very beginning. He just sat there, was trying to get out of the rain. And Mr. Metcalf, the deceased here, let's ascribe the worst possible situation to him. He gets upset.
Let's make him racist.
He doesn't like black people. He's a white guy who doesn't like black guys. Let's say he went up to him and he called him a whole bunch of racial names and said, you know, swearing at him. And because we all know verbal provocation.
I think people need to know this. I don't know why, because I think everybody should know this. Being racist is not against the law. Being racist is not against, and that's not against the law. I don't make the laws. I wish it was against the law, but being racist or shouting racism, it's not against any laws though. So you gotta. That's why they doing this.
Deceased here. Let's ascribe the worst possible situation to him. He gets upset.
Let's make him racist.
He doesn't like black people. He's a white guy who doesn't like black guys. Let's say he went up to him and he called him a whole bunch of racial names and said, swearing at him. And because we all know verbal provocation alone gets you nowhere, right? So you can throw in all of that stuff.
We call this the mere words doctrine.
Yeah. Diarrhea of the mouth does not allow the person to which the diarrhea is directed to act in self-defense. Sorry. Remember your mom told you sticks and stones might break your bones, but words can never hurt you. That's a pretty good recitation of this point right here. So let's describe to him the worst. He's spewing out racial insults, and then let's just say he lays hands on a very peaceful Mr. Anthony, right? And starts forcibly moving him out of the tent. Now, this would be terrible conduct on behalf of Mr. Metcalf, right? Mr. Metcalf shouldn't get excited. It's impolite to swear at people. He could have got a security guard. He could have got the coach. He could have done anything else but lay hands on Mr. Anthony. But let's say he lays hands on Mr. Anthony. All we got so far is an aggressor who's using ordinary physical force. And what do I mean by ordinary physical force? The kind of force that is not likely to lead to either death or a serious bodily injury, or serious physical injury, as it's sometimes explained in the statute. Do we have that? We got a fist fight here between two guys that are probably roughly equal. They're the same age. They're both athletic. You could see the pictures. They look roughly the same size. Now, of course, you start changing that, right? One guy's 300 pounds and the other guy's 150 pounds. That might lead to a different conclusion. But all you got so far is an aggressor who is using ordinary physical force. If you take that stage that I just set, then Mr. Anthony is absolutely entitled to defend himself with ordinary physical force. That means he can stand up and punch Mr. Metcalf in the face. He can push him back. He can get into a physical struggle with him. You don't get to pull out a knife and stab the guy in the heart. That is deadly physical force. You are bringing deadly physical force to repel an imminent threat of ordinary physical force, and that is disproportionate. And even if you have a right to defend yourself here, you lose that, and you are responsible and criminally accountable if, in the way you defend yourself, you use deadly physical force in response to an ordinary physical force threat.
Yes, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And this isn't just our opinion, folks. If you look at every jurisdiction in the United States, there's a reason why they differentiate between ordinary physical force and deadly physical force. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are times where you can legally use deadly physical force in a self-defense context, but even outside of a self-defense context. But it's never in response to mere ordinary physical force.
That's going to be the problem in this case at the end of the day. And that's putting Mr. Anthony in the best possible light. And that's not the light that we're seeing this case in right now, because there are other witnesses who say that Mr. Anthony said, quote, touch me and see what happens. And also, quote, punch me and see what happens. Now, this can be taken as either consent or mutual combat, right? It's an invitation to get into a fist fight, or provocation. You're inviting this situation that is looked on in a very disfavored way. You know that that's coming out at trial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many subsections hidden away in these statutes all over the United States. And one of them is that if you are the initial aggressor in an incident, you don't get to claim self-defense. In other words, if you brought on the incident, you don't get to claim self-defense. Now, what brought on the incident in this case? It's tough to say. Will a prosecutor try
Well, it
to
ain't tough
argue
to say.
that maybe even entering into the other team's tent in the first place was starting the incident? They might try to argue
Maybe
that.
he's a trespasser. He's in the wrong.
Maybe
something
there's,
like that.
I think it's a weak argument, but maybe it's an argument. But to respond to, hey, man, you got to leave our tent, which is a valid request, with touch me and see what happens or punch me and see what happens, that sounds like fighting words to me. It sounds like legally relevant provocation, which could lead a prosecutor to argue to the judge, they shouldn't even get a self-defense instruction because the subsection of that statute says that they don't get one if they started the confrontation.
Yeah, you don't automatically get to argue self-defense. I mean, you have the burden of production. If you are going to bring a self-defense claim, you got to offer some evidence. You don't automatically get a self-defense jury instruction. And you may have enough here, and these are generally liberally.
But they still haven't covered. I had no other choice. I could have left. They still haven't covered the using deadly force as self-defense. This was self-defense. No, you could have left. You had no other choice. Your Honor, I had no other choice. That's why this is self-defense. You have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you had no other choice. No other choice.
Handed out by judges because judges are automatically get a self-defense jury instruction. And you may have enough here. And these are generally liberally handed out by judges because judges are savvy enough to know that if they don't give a self-defense instruction in a case and they get convicted and the case is appealed to a court of appeals and that court of appeals says, there was enough here. And I think there's enough here already just because Mr. Anthony made the initial statement to the police officer, I was protecting myself, he put his hands on me. I think you're there just with that statement coming in. That's enough. And so I think he's going to get his self-defense jury instruction.
A good judge would err on the side of giving the instruction and turning it over to the jury.
But then when you put it along with, punch me and see what happens, touch me and see what happens, and you happen to know you brought a knife along to the track meet, the high school track meet, where there's certainly, forget about the fact that the knives aren't even allowed on the school property. Forget the fact that under Texas law, it might be illegal because knives, I understand, that are over 5.5 inches, that the blade is longer than that, might be illegal in Texas. There might be something you need to do to get that kind of a knife. I haven't looked into it that far, but forget about all that. Imagine you legally brought a knife. You got a knife sitting in your bag, and now you are provoking somebody to punch me and see what happens. It almost looks like you want to stab the guy. You want to get into this kind of a fight. Certainly doesn't endear him to a jury. It's not going to make a jury say, we really feel bad for this guy who brought the knife to school property and is now sort of taunting or provoking this other fellow after he then went in the tent to kind of start a discussion. It's the other team's tent. You're on a rival team. Somebody is probably going to say, hey, even if it's not, we need more space in our tent because there's people on our team who want to get out of the rain as well. But just because, maybe we're talking strategy or maybe we're having some discussion amongst how we're going to handle the next meet or something like that. And we don't want the competition sitting in our tent. I mean, somebody is probably going to ask you to leave. I don't know how all this is going to play out, but none of it puts Mr. Anthony in a very sympathetic light for a jury.
Absolutely. So the long-established principles of proportionality are going to cause some serious problems for the defense here. But it gets worse, Mark. We have something called consciousness of guilt evidence that the prosecutor gets to play around with as well.
Whoa.
Consciousness of guilt evidence is when somebody's behavior following an event reflects the fact that they might be guilty, that they had a guilty mindset at the time. And so what happens after the event? Mr. Anthony leaves there. He discards the knife. Discards the knife in the bleachers, discards his bag from which he pulled out the knife in the bleachers and takes off. Now, why is this relevant? Well, we defend people all the time in self-defense cases, and I can tell you that people who believe that they acted in valid self-defense are, they're pretty proud of that fact. They're like, I had to do that. I had to do that. It wasn't pleasant. I didn't enjoy doing it, but I'm damn proud that I did. I'm really happy that I did. And, I did it because I needed to protect myself or a third party or for any other legal reason. They don't usually try to hide the weapon. They don't usually try to hide the weapon.
Flee the scene.
And then flee the scene. And guess what? The prosecutor gets to talk about all of that. Okay, if you thought you acted properly in self-defense, why'd you discard everything? Why'd you go running away?
Yeah, and prosecutor's probably going to get a jury instruction to the jury that's going to say something along the lines of, if you find that the defendant attempted to flee the scene and hide the knife, you can consider that as consciousness of guilt. And I think that's pretty clear. I think that is exactly what the jury is going to conclude from that kind of activity.
Yeah, Mr. Anthony may say, well, I left the scene because I thought these guys were still dangerous and were still threatening me and everything like that. But then, of course, that begs the question, why discard the knife right there next to them in the bleachers? Where he discarded the knife was just right there in the bleachers. He just armed them, if that's his theory, that these guys are dangerous. So I think this is going to cause problems.
It all bodes really bad for Mr. Anthony.
All right, so all that said, Mark, and I think both of us are saying with the evidence that's presented right now, looks like a very tough case for the defense. So let's have some fun. Let's pretend that this guy was an AOR client. First and foremost, if this guy was an AOR client, no question, we would defend him in this case.
Yeah, that's an easy one. I mean, we'd actually be really excited about defending him in this case. Yeah. Assuming I would have wanted him, first thing I would talk to him is, why did you just shut up? Why didn't you call us right away? We would have told you to just shut up. We would have put the officer on the line. We would have talked to him. We would have, look, if there were important things to put out there in terms of self-defense, we would have said, look, our client felt threatened. He felt like he was at risk of serious physical injury here. We're going to give you all the facts later on. We just want to let you know that's the situation right now. We would deal with that situation. But how would we defend this case? We certainly wouldn't roll over and say, well, look at all the things Mark and Andy just said. This looks really bad. We better quickly cut a deal or something like that. No, we'd be gearing up in a big way. Well, first thing would be to talk to the client. Say, what the heck was going on? Explain to us why you did this. And look, I don't know what he would say, but I expect that he would probably say something. I hope he would say something along the lines of, I was really afraid that I was going to be injured here. I can think of many things he would say, right? We know the twin brother was right there. Maybe it was 2 against 1. Maybe it was more than 2 against 1. Maybe he's in the tent of the other team. And when Mr. Metcalf stands up and gets into this, thing with him, the whole team gets up and now pumps up their chest and say, yeah, you got to get out of our tent. Now it's a whole group of people and he's worried. So now we've changed the analysis, right? We have several people against one person. He's also standing on the bleachers. Now, he's not super high up probably, but bleachers can be dangerous places. It's easy to fall over on the bleachers. It's easy to fall down and hit your head or roll down. So there could be a way to defend this case where Mr. Anthony is at a reasonable concern of an imminent serious physical injury.
Yeah, let's talk about that because people are confused about this point. The law allows you to use deadly physical force in self-defense or defense of others if you are reasonably concerned about imminent death or serious physical injury. That's right. You can use deadly physical force if a reasonable person in your position would have believed that there was an imminent risk of serious physical injury. There's an old adage, right? There's an old adage that's floating around right now surrounding this case. You don't bring a gun to a fist fight. We'll modify it a little bit for this case for Mr. Anthony. You don't bring a knife to a fist fight. And all he did was bring a knife to a fist fight. Well, that's an old adage. And
usually, right?
It's helpful because it conveys an important principle, what we're talking about, of proportionality. But as it turns out, there are many instances where you can validly bring a knife to a fist fight. You just explored a couple of them there. And remember, when we're talking proportionality here, we mean the type of you're allowed to use whatever force is what you're facing imminently. And so if there's a gang of people surrounding you, that could easily end up in serious physical injury or even death. If you're pushed over the bleachers, if you're worried they're going for a weapon, even if you're mistaken, because we have a statute in every jurisdiction that says a reasonable mistake of fact can be substituted in for a mental state in a defense statute. So in non-lawyer terms, that basically means even if you were wrong about the fact that you were facing deadly physical force, say, for example, he believed reasonably that the guy was going for a knife, but it turned out he was going for a cell phone or something like that. If a reasonable person would have believed that he was going for a knife, you can use deadly physical force.
Yeah, imagine you do some interviews in this case, and there are other people from Mr. Metcalf's team in the tent, and you say to them, do you remember this incident? Do you remember the day? Yes, yes, yes. When this thing started, it attracted your attention, didn't it? Yes, it did. And you were sitting down when that happened. Yes, you did. And then as the thing got more escalated, you got concerned and you stood up to see what was happening. Yeah, I did. Okay, that would be huge,
absolutely.
right? That would be huge. Maybe were you standing up to try to gang up and fight Mr. Anthony? Absolutely not. That's fine, because when Mr. Anthony testifies, he says, now, of course, this is going to be a lot harder since he opened his big mouth at the beginning and didn't say anything like this. But, when this started, I saw a whole bunch of people on the team. They started standing up and also coming towards me, and I thought the entire gang was getting ready to attack me. And if you can now put that together with a couple interviews of people in the tent who said, yeah, it wasn't in a threatening way. I didn't think so, but I was standing up just to see what was happening. Now you got maybe a reasonable mistake of fact. You got something to work with, something you can chew on and say, look, he was wrong about this, but a reasonable person in his position would have believed that we had a numbers problem. It was one against several people who were also athletes and capable of doing harm, and you couple that with the standing in the bleachers, and now all of a sudden it looks more like a reasonable concern about a serious physical injury.
There are many great questions that you could ask.
Now you see why you keep your mouth shut. Now you see why you keep your mouth shut, because the way you tell the story, it's a big difference, makes a big difference. Because people can say, now I see why he was afraid of him and a twin brother. Everybody stood up to see what was going on, and everybody started looking at me. Yeah, I just looked to see what was going on. Nah, bruh. But he looked because he thought that he gave a signal and said, hey, get out of our tent. Hey, here we go. When he said that, everybody looked. And I thought they was all about to attack me, man. That's why you keep your mouth shut. Let your lawyer do the work.
Asked during a defense interview in a case like this to develop these types of defenses. For example, person in the tent, one of Metcalf's friends, what were your hands doing at the time? Where were your hands positioned? Were they in your pocket? Were you reaching for anything? How were you standing? What angle did he see you at? You can use these things to develop reasonable beliefs that he might be in imminent danger of being shot or stabbed or some kind of a weapon coming out.
Was it cold and rainy that day? Did you happen to put your hands in your pocket? Oh, yeah, I think I did have my hands. Great. You can stop right there. And then if Mr. Anthony says, yeah, I saw so-and-so put his hand in his pocket, maybe you got something there. The other thing is, and again, probably can't use it because Mr. Anthony opened his big mouth. But, I mean, what if Mr. Anthony was what we sometimes call the eggshell plaintiff, right? What he had some kind of injury, disability. Maybe he says, look, I just had, some kind of a problem. And if I get punched in the face, that's a bigger injury for me that it would be given the condition that I was in at the time. Than you would think it was, but who knows if such a condition exists, and if it did, and he didn't mention anything about it, now that's a problem. You're gonna have a hard time proving that. But these are the kinds of things that you might be able to argue to get your client here, Mr. Anthony, in a position where if he can't say I was facing a real imminent threat of serious physical injury, I at least thought I was. That by itself could be a complete defense in this case, or it could mitigate the thing, maybe down from a murder to a manslaughter. That's another possibility here.
There's another thing I would do if I was the defense attorney in this case. A lot of people are making a lot of noise about the fact that he illegally had this knife on school grounds. I would argue to keep out that fact. I would argue to keep out the fact that he had the knife there was illegal, because it doesn't matter to the self-defense analysis. It does not matter, say, for example, that you engage in a self-defense shooting. You had to defend yourself with a gun, and you happen to do it in a gun-free zone. Well, that might be a different crime, might be a regulatory crime or illegal possession, but it ain't relevant to whether or not you reasonably believed you were in imminent danger of serious physical injury or death.
I mean, I can't resist saying it might be a problem for people who are enrolled in programs that compete with the attorneys on retainer program, because you might get excluded for that reason.
Almost all of them excluded.
Almost all of them, yeah. And if you're not sure about that, check out our recent client testimonial on the New York case. Maybe we'll link to it in this video, where people can see a case that we did that would have been excluded by some of our competitors for two separate independent reasons. But we don't care about that stuff because we like doing these cases, and this is certainly one. And actually, I had an AOR client of ours sent me an email. He's probably going to watch this video, and I'm sure he'll be happy I'm mentioning this, but he emailed me to ask me the very question. If this was me, would you guys have covered me in this situation? I immediately responded back, of course we would cover you.
Easiest yes ever.
Easiest yes ever. Because he's going to get a self-defense jury instruction in this. Because as I've said, I think there's enough here already, at least to argue that. It'd be interesting to have an attorney-client meeting with Mr. Anthony to find out, indeed, what was in his head at the time this happened. And we can't just make up facts. We're speculating about what he might say in that meeting to justify the fact. No, if he just says, look, the guy put his hands on me, and I don't like it when people put their hands on me, and that's why I stabbed him. We would say, there's no other reason. What about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? If he says, no, he just put his hands on me, and I don't like people touching me, and that's why I stabbed him. All right, that's when you start thinking about maybe this is one we don't want to go to trial.
Yeah, you definitely want to try to work out a plea. But kicking around all these defenses and threatening the prosecutor that, hey, we've got a good chance at trial of acquitting, and you guys are on a national stage right now. You could end up with egg on your face in a big way. Why don't you make our client a reasonable plea offer? That's how we negotiate these things.
Yeah, you got to make the prosecutor feel, number one, we're not afraid to try this case, right? And they're going to know that with us. That's all we do. Every lawyer at the firm works on every case. So our entire team would be working on this case. We would also have local counsel in Texas. We had several people in our network. There's a lot of good lawyers in Texas who are very pro-2A, very pro-freedom, love these kinds of cases. We'd have a real all-star team and a use of force expert and an investigator here. And that prosecutor would believe we're not afraid to go to trial. But you need more than that. You got to have a little bit of horsepower to say, and we might win, right? Because that's the egg you're talking about. And say, look, this is a national stage. If you take this thing to trial and we walk our guy out of the courtroom on a not guilty because of self-defense, you're going to look really bad in this case. And that's how you can get them, hopefully, to cough up some reasonable kind of plea. Because, unless more facts come out in this case, I have trouble seeing how Mr. Anthony's defense team is going to want to take this case, 17-year-old kid who's looking at a murder charge, to trial. Because right now, with the information that has come out, this does not look like a good case at trial for Mr. Anthony.
Yeah, it looks like one that might plead, because there's also an addition to possible legal defenses that I hope his defense team explores, because even though we don't think it looks like valid self-defense, he's an American, and Americans deserve a zealous defense. We need to put the state to its burden in each and every case for each and every defendant. That's the only way that we can remain a free society, is by challenging the state. But in addition to those defenses that are hopefully going to be raised effectively, there's lots of mitigation in this case, and that's that magic lawyer word that we use every now and then that just basically means stuff that humanizes the defense, stuff that makes him not as culpable, the fact that he's young, the fact that he doesn't have any convictions, he doesn't have a long history of crime or juvenile conduct or anything like that. In fact, quite the contrary. It sounds like he's the head of a track team and maybe a football team as well, and he seems like he's doing pretty well. Obviously, there might be a blemish on his record from a fight that he got into at school, but that's not too uncommon. It sounds like mostly it's mitigation.
Yeah, so in terms of mitigation, he's probably in pretty good shape. He's going to have to come in and say, I really made a bad split-second decision here, and kind of own what he did to kind of throw himself on the mercy of the court for sentencing. Keep in mind, he's also a minor. I think he is going to be tried as an adult, and I haven't researched what the transfer process is in Texas, if they got to transfer him from juvenile to adult, or they could just directly charge him. My guess is, like would be the case here in Arizona, they're probably just going to directly charge him into adult court. Also think it's important to note that the burden is really fun here in self-defense case, right? Because the burden, once the burden of production is met, which I think it's already met, it will be met in this case, is the burden is going to be on the state to disprove self-defense, to say this was not self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt. That's always a really fun burden. It's one of the reasons I love self-defense cases, because you can maybe raise enough of an issue or a ruckus here about what happened, maybe just holes in the case. And this might be one you don't even need to put them on the stand. I mean, you probably do, but I could imagine playing around with it. Who knows what he's going to say, right? If the guy doesn't say, imagine you're left with, well, yeah, the reason I stabbed him is because he put his hands on me, and I just don't like people who put their hands on me. That's all you got. Okay, you're not going to put this guy on the stand, but you can raise lots of questions about the kinds of things we were talking about and see if you can make an argument that the state didn't disprove Mr. Anthony's claim of self-defense that he made right there at the scene. I mean, because look, we prefer people shut up, but when they don't, we can make the sort of converse argument that, look, he came right out at the scene and admitted that was the one statement you'll be able to use, not alleged. I'm the guy who did it. Does that sound like a guy who's trying to sort of evade? Maybe he was running because, he's afraid that people aren't going to believe him. Maybe he was running because he was worried that the gang might run after him or something like that. Who knows? So there are some things you can use to argue the case, but it all really hinges on the part that we don't know about, which is, what is Mr. Anthony going to say in an attorney-client meeting about why he did what he did?
Yeah, you don't get to make the final decision on the best defense in the case until you have a really good conversation with your client where you sit down. And this conversation can't be its best form until you've received all of that discovery that you're entitled to. Due process requires the state to cough up each and everything that they're planning on using against you at trial, and sitting down with your client, really going through all the witness statements and all the body-worn cameras and any video that may or may not exist and every single police report, as we do in every single one of our cases. Then and only then will you really know what's in your client's best interest to bring as a defense.
Yeah, and certainly more is coming here. I remember seeing in the police report that I think at least 2 coaches actually witnessed this incident, and we didn't get their statements, so who knows what it is that they are going to say that they saw. But probably if those 2 coaches are going to give the same story, and they're, the coaches are probably going to be mostly seen as unbiased, good witnesses, they're the adults there. If they're giving the same story about what happened, and that story is close to what we think is going to be consistent with the facts here, I think it's going to be a steep uphill climb for Mr. Anthony to take this one to trial.
Here's a stupid thing that we might say a few words about, but I hope we don't spend too much time on it. Like every single case and every single incident and every single story that comes up today, race is the issue du jour. Whenever the skin pigmentations of the people involved happen to be different, both sides start barking about race. And when I say both sides, I'm talking the folks right of center and left of center. It's always right down political lines. Who would have thought? Right down political lines. We have the right side just as guilty as the left side on this right now. Folks on the right saying that this was a racially motivated murder. The black guy saw the white kid and was motivated by the fact that he was white to stab him. While as people on the other side are saying, this is totally racist to even charge this guy. He wouldn't be charged. This is obvious self-defense, and he wouldn't even be charged in the first place if he wasn't black.
Imagine if the skin color is reversed, right? How that position.
There'd be riots in Frisco right now.
Riots in the street, yeah, no doubt. So, we don't know that race had anything to do with this case at all. We have no evidence.
There's no evidence whatsoever.
Yeah, no evidence that this case was racially motivated. In fact, from what we can see, both people had friends in their inner circle that had different pigments on their skin. So this may have absolutely nothing to do with race. I just certainly hope the day comes. I hope I live long enough to see the day when we can get past all this stuff and just analyze it as two 17-year-old males had a situation. It doesn't matter what the skin color is.
Yeah, but since that is the perception of the public right now, a good defense attorney needs to keep that stuff in mind.
No question.
It comes especially relevant in jury selection.
Yep.
The types of questions you ask the jury during that voir dire process to see what everybody's feelings are surrounding the race issue in this case. It could be very relevant.
Yeah, if this was our case and we were taking it to trial, I think we would almost certainly get a jury consultant, a jury expert to kind of sit there with us and help select that jury. Those are the people that are going to be making the decisions on this case. And it might be more complex than, well, we just want black people on the jury. So
Right.
we'll see where it goes. But this will be a fun one to keep our eye on. It's certainly a big controversy because of race.
Yes.
Right? That's why this is such a big issue.
Yeah, it's such a tragic story all around for both of the families involved. But yeah, we're going to keep an eye on it. And as soon as any updates come, I'm sure there will be new information that comes out. I'm looking forward to doing some follow-up videos on it if you're down, man.
Yeah, I can't help think about how unbelievably sad, unnecessary, and foolish this case is as one twin brother dies in the arms of the other twin brother, and how easily this situation could have been avoided. It's a disgrace. We just got to do better in our country.
And with Mr. Anthony, to be absolutely fair to him here, his past does not reflect a history of horrible violence. It actually reflects a past of success, at least in sports and at his high school. And probably this all boiled down to a split-second, really, really dumb decision that he made in the heat of the moment.
Agree with that.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for tuning in today, guys. Go and check out attorneysforfreedom.com to learn all about our law firm and how we...
That's exactly what happened, man. A split second. Oh yeah, this gonna be self-defense. If I'm gonna stab this dude. I've been carrying this knife around. I don't know how to use it. I'm gonna figure out a way to use it. And here go a white boy. Oh yeah, he on the other team. Oh yeah, I'm using this knife, and I got a way to get away with it because it's self-defense. Split second. This is what's going. Hit me. No. Touch me. Nah. Hit me. Come on, man. I feel sorry for him. I'm not saying. I feel sorry for the fact that he don't understand. He knows what he did. Now he really knows what he did. But at that split second, he was not educated enough on adult life, and now he's being tried as an adult. So him not understanding as an adult, you got to talk to your kids, man. You got to talk to your kids and sit down and talk to them and let them know, yo, do you know, sit down and talk to them. If the police come to you and you said that you did this and somebody hit you, what you gonna do? Hit them back? Come on, man. We gotta talk to our kids. I'm gonna get on up out of here. Y'all take it light, take it slow. Tell them Uncle Mike told you so. Peace out.